The reason I show this to you, oh, sorry, we're being recorded, by the way, so if you need to turn off your cameras, you should. So if you need to extend the question or you're a little bit more that you've drafted, take this opportunity to look at what you've put together. And if you feel like your course level question or sort of falls similar to what we see here, this might be a good time to make a note about how you could revise that going forward. Let's take a look at a different question because there's some other ways to consider this as well. If the course level question developed sounds something like this, how could we refine it using these three, potentially four filters? The question is it wrong for Black, Indigenous people of color to resist oppressions inflicted on them by people with power and privilege? Now, if that's the course level question that's being set over the year where students are engaging with it unit after unit, day after day, which one of these filters or one or more of these filters might be something that we want to use as a focus point to sort of refine the course level question? Some interesting feedback there. Thank you, Melanie. Okay, so we won't dwell on this one too long. Most people have given an answer 1, 2, or 3. Some people have said, sure, why not all 3? So a lot of these are obviously debatable, and we can look at them in a number of different ways to think about some of the ways that this could be refined as a course level question. The one that I wanted to highlight here is actually the third one. So if we're going to be picky about it, I mean, we could really actually deconstruct this in a number of different ways, but I would, in my opinion, humble opinion, say that the third sort of filter is the one that we want to focus on, because this question doesn't address the important overarching themes, concept, and pressing issues. Well, if the themes and pressing issues are identity, Black, Indigenous people of color, so they're speaking to identity on some level. Power and privilege are literally named. Oppressions, systems of oppressions are named sort of right in there. And so is resistance, and perhaps agency is conferred by talking about resistance. So maybe that first filter, it may get most of those. Extend over multiple units of study. It'd be hard to talk about all the things in this question in just one unit. That seems like it would span over a lot more time, perhaps over the time of a course, so maybe that makes sense. But I think my qualm with this one might be that third filter, stimulate ongoing thinking and questioning. The reason why is I'm imagining a scenario where you've put together this course level question, you made like a poster to hang in your room, the students are engaging with it, and on the first day you put up that poster and you show it to the class, a student in the back of the classroom raises their hand and says, yes. That's a sort of a binary question, right? Like yes or no, is it wrong or is it right? Another teacher who in our chat, I just forgot the person's name, said if you change it to how might, or we change the wording around, that might sort of create a sort of prompt where it isn't a closed question and might be a little bit better in this case. The answer in this one is kind of yes or no, kind of binary. There's ways to sort of move around that. And so again, if you found that what you developed for your course inquiry question draft sort of conforms or sort of falls into that sort of that area of being not as effective as it could be, again, a great time to sort of look at that question and make some notes about how you would refine your own question going forward. All right, promise this will be the last one. Let's try this question on for size, and again, do the same work here. This question is, how does oppression based on one's identity inspire resistance? Let's look at our course themes. Let's see if they agree, they sort of match there, whether or not this goes under multiple units of study, and again, stimulates ongoing thinking and questioning. Whatever feedback you have here is great. Go ahead and put down the number inside that chat window and see what we're thinking in terms of this particular one. It seems like folks are a little less sure about this one. Okay, so not to keep us hung up on these particularly these engaging opportunities or these opportunities to engage for too long, but I did want to share that this particular one that is on the screen right now, I'm cheating because this is actually the one that I use with my course, and I actually showed that to folks the other day. That doesn't mean that this question is beyond reproach. I think that there's still some work here to be done if I look back at my own practice and think about how this question would go. But here, at least, you can kind of see that I've acknowledged on some level that the themes that I was going after considering in the course are all sort of named in this question in some way, or they would lead you to one. Certainly we're talking about identity, we're talking about oppression and systems of oppression. And since we're talking about oppression, sort of the nature of oppression being power and privilege was something that seems like it would be engaged with. So they do sort of tie into it. And of course, we're talking explicitly about resistance, which confers perhaps agency at the end of that resistance. Again, a little bit of a stretch, but you have to consider how you got to those particular pieces of language, and that kind of connects to the other themes. Multiple units of study. I think it might be hard to talk about these multiple different concepts within just one unit, so perhaps you can extend that. I think that looking back, the place where I would probably refine my question a little bit more is in that stimulate ongoing thinking and questioning category. There's some work that probably needs to be done there. And the reason I show this is not just to show you my question, which you have seen before, but also to highlight the fact that even if you think you've got it, your course level question is always a developing work in progress. And so at the end of the first month, the first year, the first couple of years after using a course level question, the more you think about it and the more you think about how you'd like to refine it, don't be afraid about engaging with that work, because it's important to make this question valuable for the rest of the instruction that you're going to build within it. So one more thing that I want to talk about, or a couple more things, is another filter. That last filter, that filter 4 really, which is talking about something that's specific to ethnic studies, where we discuss whether or not the question that we develop conforms to or sort of works with the idea that we had around the definition for ethnic studies in our school district. Now, again, this is my school district that my instruction is informed around, Oakland Unified, but it sort of gives you an idea about one last thing that I would need to filter my responses, my draft of the course inquiry question. If it makes sense that they connect with each other, then this may be an effective course inquiry question. And this way we can make sure that what we intend to do in our specific classroom is really grounded in the fundamental ideas of ethnic studies and what that means for our larger community. So again, just looking as a very brief comparison, my course inquiry draft does sort of speak about the idea of oppression, and that's definitely engaged within our definition. Identity, as we're talking about the histories and cultures of historically marginalized groups that may be in our community. So we're talking about identities. And of course, the last part where it talks about solidarity and transforming lives in communities, that has something to do with the resistance that's going to be studied in our course. So at least on some level, the question that I've drafted does connect with the larger ethnic studies definition that we would have developed in our course. And if you remember, that was some of the work we engaged with in the very first day of our seminars. Okay, now, last thing, promise, before we re-engage with our own questions, there's one more thing I'd like for you to consider. And this is an important thing moving forward with when you're trying to consider how the students are going to react to this course level question. What you really want to do at this point is think about what will students need to learn in order to be able to answer this course level question. So if I'm looking at my example of the course level question again, what specific things do students need to know to be able to answer this question? Or more importantly, what kinds of questions are they going to ask to be able to answer this question? So students may be thinking about, well, I don't know what some of these words mean. So that means that your instruction is going to be around perhaps getting to the bottom, or at least starting to investigate some of these different ideas. Students may not know what oppression is, what identity really is, what or how people resist. Why do people oppress others? Which identities face oppression or more oppression than others? So these are some of the questions that you're probably or likely going to engage with over the course of the year, or even just the part where you introduce the course level question to your students. So it's probably a good idea to start to think about what your responses to some of these questions would be, and how to engage with students when some of the natural questions that they're going to ask, just to be able to think about and consider your course level question, are presented. And that's part of the work that I want us to do in our first session, our first breakout session right now. Okay, so as we've done before, if you wouldn't mind, Devin is going to go ahead and post the link to today's resource page. And as we've done in the past, go ahead and click that link and you'll make a copy for session 3 resources. Putting that in there now. Great. So when you click that and you make your copy, this time the resource page is yellow. They're distinct from each other by color coding. Near the top of that organizer, of that resource page, is an organizer that looks like the one that we just used to revise our questions. We had the course level question at the top, a little space for our themes, and also some of the reminders of the different things that we look for to make sure that the course level question is effective on the side. If you can, and you remember it, or you have your original draft available, take a moment and fill out the part that collects your inquiry question. We're going to refer to that a couple times today. So if you can take a moment and fill out the part that has your draft of your course level inquiry question in that top box that you see. And when you've done that, go ahead and scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see there's another box that says, what will students need to learn in order to answer this question? I'll give folks a minute just to fill out their draft, to copy, paste, or just write as what they remember that draft question to be. And then locate that, what will students need to learn? And what we're going to do in just a moment is collaborate on filling that section out right now. Okay, so we're going to go into breakout rooms, and hopefully by now you've already changed your screen name to reflect the grade that you want to work with, dash, and then your name. I can't guarantee that we'll be in the exact same breakout groups as we were in our last session. Our group has changed a little bit since then, so likely you'll be grouped with some folks that you may or may not have worked with before. But this time when we're in those breakout sessions, what I'm hoping that we'll do is, in alphabetical order, in 4-person groups, we're going to share the course inquiry question draft that you've composed, right? So first person alphabetical order will say, my course inquiry question that I come up with so far is this. Now the next move is, the peers in the group, the other 3 people, will suggest concepts students need to know to answer that question. So, for example, if we look back at the example that I gave, talking about, again, how does oppression based on one's identity inspire resistance? Other people in the group would say, oh, they need to know what oppression means. Oh, they need to know what resistance means. And so start to fire off as many of those different sort of ideas about what students will need to know, so that the person who came up with the draft in the first place can start to populate that box on their worksheet that says, what will students need to learn? That'd be your opportunity to start collecting some of the things that your peers are sharing in terms of feedback about what students need to get from your question. After 2 minutes, we're hoping that we'll switch to another member of the group. So if you wouldn't mind having somebody just do a little bit of a time check. So after a while, if a couple minutes have gone by, we'll give somebody else another opportunity to sort of give their example of their course level inquiry draft. And then the other folks in the group will sort of share their feedback as well. All right. We'll be doing that for the next 7 or 8 minutes once Devin sends us to the breakout rooms. And of course, if there's any questions or if there's anything you don't understand or need a little support around, myself and Stacy will be dispatched to your breakout room so we can give you some support there. if there are no more questions, Devin, if you wouldn't mind sending us to our breakout rooms, we can get started.
Hi, let me send you to your rooms. I'm going to send, Mizuki, I'm going to send you to other K5 teachers. Here we go. And I will send you to some high school teachers. Hold on a second here. Let me send you to a room. Send you to number 11.
Right? Now for US history, how has resistance inspired real change for governance? Sure. Focus on identity, perhaps if it helps students wrestle with who they think they or know who they are. Okay. And in terms of the questions from this chat, right, all the questions and all the responses are actually made available. After each session, I try my best to make sure that I'll send out to everyone a log of our video for the session today, as well as a recording of the chat. And if you look at the session resources towards the very, very bottom of our session resources, there's an area where I have links to the YouTube videos as well as a chat log. So if something was brought up in chat or something was introduced or just part of the video that you wanted to revisit, even wanted to rewatch or relook at the slideshows, those are all available for you. And if you can't find them, I'll be happy to point them to you. Or if you want me to send them to you directly, I can do that as well. Just send me a message. But yeah, those resources should actually be provided for you. And thank you, Sherry, for sharing the TED Talk. I'm looking forward to watching. Oh, if you've got a good resource, by all means, definitely share them. We love to make sure that as many people have access to the resources that we're working with. So if you saw a good resource, a TED Talk like that, definitely post a link or mention what the name of it is. And that's something that's worth investigation. I do look at our group chat sessions and sort of take notes off that. So you never know what may turn up to be useful for some other folks going forward. Okay. So moving along then, I'd like to spend some more time talking today about the unit focus inquiry questions. So we already talked about the bigger global course level questions, but now let's take a step away and look at what they would look like on the next sort of tier in our inquiry-driven course design model. So we looked at this yesterday for a little bit, and I want to take just a little bit more time to re-engage with it. We talked about the inquiry-driven course design and how that course level question really helps us understand what we're going to be teaching in our units, and then in those particular units, what the content would be within those units, because the content and the unit questions themselves need to help us answer that bigger course level question that we're developing. And right now we're going to focus on that second tier, that unit focus question, with the understanding, again, we know that our course level question is not finished, it's not perfect, but let's work on the assumption that what we've got so far is what we're going to go with, just for the purposes of this demonstration. And now let's take a step back and look at that next tier down, and look at what some of the things we can do to sort of use that course level question and some of the other resources we have to inform what goes into that unit focus question. So I'd like to highlight right now the differences between course level questions and unit focus questions so that we can get a better understanding of what we need to do to construct them. Okay, so we've already run down what effective course level questions look like. But now looking at effective unit level questions, and it says course there twice, apologies. You want to shed light on the course question. So whatever you're interrogating, whatever you're investigating in the unit question should help you as a student, when you construct an answer, ultimately answer that bigger course level question. Your unit level question should help construct understanding of the particular units or lessons you have within there. So don't make them sort of arbitrary, like your unit level questions should be in response to what the students are going to be looking at on a day-to-day assignment basis, and also connect to what that bigger question is, again, at that higher level, the course level question. You're going to want the unit level question to inspire the students to be able to make a thesis or a claim about that question that they're engaging with. They should be able to come up with an answer. A teaching thesis is what you need to develop, so that way the students will have a model of how it would be to answer that unit question. Again, that also works for your course level question as well. I didn't necessarily state that in the previous session, but you want to have, at least on paper, some sort of answer to that big question. And you definitely want to have some sort of answer for that unit level question as well. And because we want our students to think a little bit critically, we want to have the question to perhaps allow for more than one argument. So if there's just one way to see it, as opposed to a number of different ways to sort of approach an answer to that question, perhaps that unit question might need a little bit more refinement. And again, once you've done those filters and you sort of made sure that your unit question is effective on those terms, one thing that we're also going to want to do is to return to that ethnic studies lens. And again, that definition that we created for ethnic studies in that first day, that should be what sort of guides us into making sure that anything we're doing on the course level or the unit level sort of conforms to what we want to sort of honor in our ethnic studies pursuit. I'll give you a moment to sort of sit with those, because we'll be doing some work around developing unit questions in just a moment. Okay. So you got an idea about what we're looking at in terms of course questions versus unit questions. Obviously, they're sitting at different tiers on our sort of model that we had there. I'd like to give a different looking model so hopefully you can help yourself understand the relationship between the course questions and the unit questions. So what I'd like to do is return back to a slide that I showed the group on Wednesday. And it's this. This is the course map that I developed for my course, again, with my course level question in that oval in the center of the page. But I want to give you a little bit of an idea about how these course questions relate to each other. So the course question relates to the unit questions, how all the unit questions relate to the course question, and then how you might go about constructing something similar. So you see at the top of the page, the grade in school, of course, but I have the course level question, the course inquiry question written out. And beneath that, the year that previous, the one that we're engaged with, and then the next year of study. Again, this is just one model. Yours will likely look different. I posed that course level inquiry question at the center and sort of direct the path of thinking about where the students will sort of take this question to hopefully interrogate what they need to interrogate to be able to form an answer to it. The first thing I had my students do in those unique units, those groups of ideas that I wanted them to engage with, my first unit, my main idea that we sort of identified in the previous session, is around identity. And so what I did was come up with a course level question that feeds into that unit question, that unit focus question. So my unit focus question, should I be able to answer that, should on some level help me answer that bigger course question. Unit questions help me answer the course question. Mine was, why is it important to tell counter narratives about the dominant narratives people say about your identity? In constructing a response to that question, part of what they need to know to answer that bigger course question is what's going to be learned. And again, I could think about all the different language and concepts that I want my students to focus on within that unit. Things like to answer that question about dominant narratives and counter narratives about identity, they're going to need to know about identity and race and nationality and gender identity, social class, stereotypes about those, and dominant and counter narratives. So those things that help me to answer that focus question are all going to be parts of my instruction for unit number 1. And hopefully looking at it this way will give you an idea of that course question is really telling me what I need to answer to make sure the students understand in my first unit. And that first unit question is really telling me all the different lessons and all the different assignments that I need to make sure my students engage with, just so they'll be able to answer that unit question. Now, once they've interrogated and got an answer to that, what else do my students need to know? Well, the next part of that question that they need to address with on the course level is we need to talk about oppression. And so what I did in my course was I made the oppression part really a deeper diver into that. So that way we actually went over 2 units, sort of the roots of what oppression is, and talking about power and privilege and marginalization, really. So we talked about things like systems, colonization as a system, the idea of indigeneity, and who had power and privilege over different groups. And so my question was, how do different people experience power, privilege, and marginalization? And again, in construction of that answer, it'll help them ultimately answer the question that's the course level question, and will help them actually answer that next unit question, which is relating to oppression. And of course, that last unit is really helping to answer that last part of the course level question, which talks about resistance. So the course level question, again, informs the unit question there. One more thing to notice, because I didn't mention it the first time, is that teaching theory, that teaching thesis, which was my attempt to answer that course level question in the oval using information that they would be able to pick up over the course of those units. Now, this looks like a lot, and it is a lot, but this is something that you construct over the course of a year. Again, starting with that course level question in the center, and then really focusing on that first one. You're always going to do your first unit first, so think about what are the first things that your students will need to engage with to be able to set up an answer to that question and set up what's going to happen next over the course of the arc of the entire course. and come up with answers to those questions as you go. So what I'd like for you to do right now is take this a little bit of time to sort of use a tool like this to conceptualize what you'd actually be doing with your course. So if you go back to our work area, our today's session resources, you'll see there's a heading that says Unit Focused Inquiry Questions, and you see a picture like the one that's on your screen right now of a blank course outline map. What I'd like for you to do is to go ahead and click on that link or the actual image itself. Either way, will take you to a link that will let you make a copy of that blank course outline map. Now, what's been provided there is a blank map like the one you see, but also some of the slides that led up to it, so that way you can sort of refer back to the differences between course level and unit level inquiry questions. You can look back at the model that I provided to sort of give you a little bit of an idea about what the scope might be. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to, as best you can, sort of populate part of that map. Now, this seems like a lot, but stay with me, because the reason that we use these sort of Google Maps or Google Slides to sort of help you do the maps is they really, they're super collaborative. So if you want some help on these, all you really need to do is share the actual document, and someone can sort of see what you're working on, see what your thinking is and your process is. And you can sort of organize the course and actually multiple unit maps on the same sort of slideshow. So you can make a copy of this and then sort of drill down to the unit level and do some similar thinking on the unit level. And you can, because it's online, you can put a lot of the shapes, or you can have a lot of the text sort of written on the form, sort of linked to a lot of different things you need, like different slides or different documents or assignments. So it makes it a little bit easier to use, kind of keeping everything together. And that's why I sort of advocate for at least the construction of your course and unit using this tool. And what I'm hoping for you to do today, though, is instead of like trying to conceptualize the whole big picture and where everything stands, sure, take some time to put that course level question or whatever draft you have it in the center. But then take a step back and sort of focus on just that first unit. It's what you're going to teach first, and it's probably what you're going to be dedicating a lot of time with on as soon as our work here and these webinars are done, trying to think about how you really get started. So it might be tempting to look at the big picture, but be careful to focus with unit one. That's what I'd like for us to gauge with first. So again, think about what the unit is about, and that's what goes in that top bar. What a potential unit focus question would be, and what some of the topics are that would cause us, that would inspire us to focus on that question. And maybe the way to do that is sort of work on that focus on section first, because you can name all the things that you're definitely going to be talking about in that first unit. You already sort of named that before when we did our work yesterday. Those are all those vocabulary terms that you group together. So those are some of the concepts that you focus on. Name those, and then look at what those names of those concepts sort of inspire you to think of as a focus question, which will again allow the students to construct an answer to the bigger question above. That's a lot. It's a little bit of time that I'm going to give folks to work on that. And let's say, we'll say, like, what time is it now? Let's give the folks about, Devin, let's about 8 to 10 minutes. I'll do a check-in after about 8 minutes to see where folks stand. But this actually requires a little bit of thought and a little bit of understanding. So let's take a step back. If you want to mute yourself or turn off your cameras real fast, I'm going to leave my microphone on, so that way I'll let everyone know we're about to get started again. All right? So let's take a little bit of time and do some work on this, and we'll all get back together soon. Devin, you have something you want to add?
I just make sure no one has any questions before they start.
Okay, yeah. If you have any questions, please fire away. I think that, so not to disturb the folks who are kind of doing something on their own, if you want to send those in.
You kind of broke up there, Jason. Are we ready to send them off to their rooms?
For this one, Devin, let's not put folks into breakout rooms just yet, because I want to bring them back before we do a breakout room conversation. So this is something that we've been working on independently for just a few minutes, and then we're going to reconnect and then break out to breakout rooms.
Can I get a clarification?
Sure.
Do you want us to plug into, are you suggesting we plug into the blank template that is a single sheet that has the ovals and the squares, or do you want us to be on the Google Doc that is trailing down?
Right, so the Google Doc is what we're going to engage with actually in our next step. So you're actually going to be working on the map itself and sort of plugging in some of the information there. We're going to respond to the Google Doc in just a little bit.
Would it be possible to go back to your template map?
Absolutely. Inside that, it should actually be included though. So on your own template, if you scroll down, like it's one of the other like maps there or slides that are there. Let me just verify that that's the case. It should be. If it isn't, I will fix that right away. Right, so when you click the link inside of our resource page to make your copy of the course map, you'll have like a blank copy of course map, but then slide 4, where it says in red letters example, is the one that I had generated so that we sort of refer back to that for some ideas. You're not seeing that? Okay, so let me make sure that I do this then. I'm going to.
I'm on the yellow sheet.
Okay, so that's great. So let me kind of walk you through you need to go. So where it says unit focused inquiry questions, and the yellow sheet, you see where it says right beneath there's like an image of the course map, the blank one. Below that it says click to create a blank course outline map. Have you got that? All right, got it?
I found it. Thanks. Sorry, I
Okay.
didn't see that in the slides. Thank you.
No, no problem. Yeah, it's on slide 4. You know that moment as a teacher when you're sitting in your room and all the kids are working hard and like there's like that work silence that's happening there where everyone's like down. That's sort of the vibe that's happening here. So I want to thank you for all participating in that. I'm sure you're all well aware of that moment. We're just like, oh, everyone's doing some stuff. Good. So we could absolutely spend a lot of time working on this. And of course, what we're working on today is just the beginning of some of the processes, some of the work that goes into the larger work of building our ethnic studies courses. I do want to, I miss that feeling too. It's well, hopefully we'll be able to get into our classrooms in a safe way sooner rather than later. But again, that last part is important, in a safe way. The next piece of work that I want us to engage in, though, will call for us to sort of take a step back from that and reflect upon a little bit around the process of coming up with this unit focus question. So we're going to go into breakout rooms once again. And I think that we might have some of the same folks that we had before. If not, that's okay. But once again, in 4-person groups, I'm going to ask us to sort of re-engage with the working document that we have, the resource document. And share one of the unit question drafts that you may have created or that you're working on. Whatever your thinking is right now, whatever small idea you may have cobbled together, just what you've got so far. And hopefully what I'm asking for is that the peers in our teaching group will be able to kind of come up with like a teaching thesis, a response to the question, or even like a student response to the question, if that's helpful. Like a student will likely answer this or this or this. The reason why you want to collect those is if you can get out in front of the different responses that students might have to whatever support that you're going to be giving them or whatever question you're going to be posing to them, you can sort of refine the question knowing the ways that they might answer it. So if the answer is not quite what you're going for, this will give you an opportunity to sort of refine that unit inquiry question based on what they're telling you as how they'd answer the question that you've actually posed. So what I'm hoping is, again, that starting with the person first in alphabetical order, apologies once again to all my A's, that you go first and sort of share what your teaching thesis is. I'm sorry, what your question is, and the respondents in your group, your peers group, will sort of share their thesis, what their answer to that question might be. And again, it'd probably be a good idea for you as the person who has shared to record as many of those thoughts as you can inside that resource page in the form that looks like the one that you see on the screen in front of you. And after 2 moments of that exchange, hopefully we'll go ahead and switch to the next member of the group so everyone will have a chance to have their voices heard. And once again, if this is confusing, if you have no idea how to go forward, if you need any sort of support whatsoever, I'm making myself available to be pulled out of the room that I'm in. And so is Stacy, who's done some of this work before, and sort of advise and support about what you should be thinking at this particular stage. Now, I do want to mention once again, and Devin has asked me to mention it to you all, that there are going to be some group shifts. Some folks have joined or left, so the exact faces that you saw in the last breakout room conversation may not be who you're seeing again. Please do your best to sort of work with those folks as you're grouped with them this time. If there are any questions, now's a good time to sort of voice them on the chat. Otherwise, Devin, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and sending us those breakouts.
I think you're muted, Jason.
I sure am. I've been talking to myself for a minute. So thank you for letting me know that. So after that breakout session, I just want to take a moment before we move on to this last part to ask, how is reflecting on that course level question and unit question sort of shape your thinking about what should be covered in your ethnic studies course? Because now getting some feedback from others maybe give you some ideas about, oh, we need to cover this, we need to cover this. So how is that experience of discussing what's going into your course and unit questions sort of shape the potential things that you might include with your course? Take a moment, if you wouldn't mind, and sort of engage with that in the chat. Say, you know, this process made me think that I need to include this, or I need to emphasize that. It's a good time to sort of surface that, because again, it's not just in service for us. The other folks going through might need this guidance as well. And also, as a brief reminder, those of us who are mentioning that, hey, I liked another person's approach. If you want to continue those collaborations, we're going to share that resource that will help us move our conversations forward after our meetings are done. So if somebody inspired you, or they sparked an idea that you'd like to continue to move forward with, there'll definitely be a way to sort of continue these conversations with these folks or others who are in our same sort of collaborative groups across grade levels, or maybe whatever affinity group that you think might need to be surfaced. We can, well, I'm going to do my best to make sure that we can connect after this is done. Yeah, shape quite, yeah, sure. Think about a better name for conquest. That's something worth considering. Depending on what the phase of conquest. There's a lot of different things to get at there. I do want to honor everyone's time, so to make sure that we do have some time to consider that first unit planning, I'm going to focus just a little bit more on what this last move is for today's session. And really I want to spend some time talking about that first unit. It's what we're going to engage in first when we're rolling out that ethnic studies course. So let's think about what it might look like to develop that. So now that we've got that course level question and that unit question sort of formulated and we're working on that, how do we determine what ethnic studies content should be taught in those units that we're developing? That last part on my little box there, that focus on, how do I determine what studies or what parts of that content are what we're going to be working on a day-to-day basis in the actual content that's delivered on a random Tuesday in our course? And so some of the ways that we're going to begin to construct that is to think about some of the things that we've already thought about. So I'm going to ask today that we revisit what we started with. And if you can, locate your session 1 resources, the resource document that we got that very first day that we all gathered together. And if you were here, that would look like going to, in your Google Doc, click on File and Open. And it'll show like a little menu. Choose that last panel that says Recent. And you'll know that you're looking at the first days, the session 1 resources, because it's a blue page and has a big yellow star on it for the Third World Liberation Front. So that way you can identify it pretty easily. We're going to look back at some of the resources that we cultivated in that very first session to help inform what we could do next in terms of setting up our course. So once again, if you weren't here, I think we should probably paste the way to copy the resource page from the first day in there, Devin, if you wouldn't mind. So I should have added that to our to-do list. But if you can paste the link to the first day's resources in there for folks who weren't here at all. But if you were, you've already filled out some of this information, so this will help go a long way towards your thinking of how to craft that first lesson or first unit and the lessons inside of it. So again, inside your Google Doc, open, choose recent, and then amongst those recent documents, it's the blue document that looks like the one that's on my screen right now, the one with the big yellow star that says Third World Liberation Front in red. And hopefully you're able to locate that, because I want us to kind of focus on some of the things that we developed over the course of that first day to inform what we're going to do now. For example, when we're looking at our identity or whatever your first unit may be, and that your first unit question, we can look at our definition of ethnic studies, that draft, the wording that we use to describe the definition for what ethnic studies means in our school or in our school district, and use that and examine what that means in relation to the unit question and the things that we can focus within that unit, focus on within that unit. For example, if I compared these two together and sort of compared them for connections, I would definitely see that I'm going to need to talk about as a lesson somewhere in this first unit, how do we honor the history of people in a community? That may be something that needs to be named. Which groups have been historically marginalized in our school community? And what are counter narratives that we can develop about those groups? And therefore, what are dominant narratives that exist about those groups? See, looking at my definition of ethnic studies and all the things that we want to accomplish within that does inform all the things that I'm going to do in our first unit of study. So it's a good thing we have that resource to refer back to. It'll give us some guidance as to what we can make that first unit look like on a day-to-day basis. Similarly, other parts of that first day's work will also inform some of the choices that we make in terms of content. For example, on that first day, we did a lot of work in terms of students' identity and sort of looking at the context of our specific school community. So I asked folks to, on a form within that first day's resources, name all the ways that your students identify or are identified by others. And remember, that was that slide that I showed you where it showed all the visible identities and all the invisible identities that you want to consider when you're thinking about teaching your students in your specific school community. And then I also asked for folks to think about the implications for curriculum design. If my students are primarily from Central America, what does that mean that my curriculum design should cover at some point to honor their histories? So at this point, when you look at these two different columns of collected information that you already, for the most part, if you were here that day, have generated some content for, that also really informs what some things you can ask in your first unit would be. For example, when I look at these two lists and think about what I want my unit focus question to be, somewhere over the course of that unit, we need to talk about, because of these lists, what is race? How does race exist in our community? What's ethnicity? What is nationality? What is gender identity, and how do those exist in our school community? Answering those questions will help me on that identity unit. So again, I'm going to need to have content in my identity unit on a day-to-day basis that talks to those questions. What are examples of dominant and counter narratives that are in different identities of community? And this also works not just with your first unit, obviously, with other units, because again, looking at this list, there's that other column with implications. And so, for example, if I make like a later unit about resistance, well, all the things that I've gathered in terms of what we need to cover over the course of the year to support those students, if I make a resistance unit later on, that means that with this list, I should probably cover, to be responsive to my community, things like the Haitian Revolution, or for all my Central American students, Oscar Romero, or for my LGBTQI plus students, maybe we have something about the Stonewall riots. So again, what we know are implications for our students and their identities should sort of push our thinking forward as to what goes on in any given time during our specific lessons. And last one, we did a little work on that first day about community resources, right? Naming some of the resources that we have access to in the areas where we teach that we can bring to bear with that instruction. So again, looking at the work that you would have gathered or some of the thinking that you would have collected around your students and who they are in that community, community groups like the K-12 educators online can help us shape some ideas, let's say about dominant or counter narratives for that first unit. Perhaps project-based learning ideas will help get our kids into the community and help make narratives about themselves and our community that are real and authentic. So again, something like that making history resources might be good to support in that. And again, thinking about who's actually in our community. Our school community that I taught in had a lot of Vietnamese students. So again, having a name and a phone number of people who are in terms of like who are the culture keepers or the community resources that can help generate ideas. If I don't know a lot about Vietnamese history in my school community, maybe I should find somebody that does, that sort of give me some ideas about what we should be teaching to be supportive of that school community. And again, there's that research part, finding out about the history of those in our school community. That could be done online. It could be done with speaking to the chambers of commerce or whoever has the history keeping tools in your community. And those are great places to sort of go forward with supporting the generation of actual lessons and content that goes into your units. So just some ideas to get started. And you've already done some of the work to get started from that previous session. You just need to transfer it to now what you'll actively be doing for the construction of what goes into your units on a content day-to-day basis. So our time together in our multiple days is almost up. And I was hoping before I let you go that there was a couple of moments to share some closing thoughts, and we can respond to these inside of our chat window. First thing I was hoping that folks could respond to was, how has the work that was started during this webinar series over the 3 days supported the development of your ethnic studies course in your school or your school district? Some feedback around how this work sort of supported you would be greatly appreciated. So if you want to take a moment, just a 60 seconds to just jot an idea down about how this work and how this effort has really supported some of the work that you're doing in your school or school community. And again, useful if we compare notes on this end at the end. While folks maybe starting to jot down some thoughts on that. Again, we know that our work is not done. This is just sort of to get us started. So if you'd also like to share your thoughts on what additional support or guidance do you envision needing as you move forward? Again, I'm hoping to remain in communication with everyone who's participated here. There's a lot of resources to do that. But going forward, after having done some of this work, what do you think that you now need to be able to get the ethnic studies course rolling in the way that's going to work best for you? Whichever one of those or both of those you want to respond to in the chat, I'll do my best to sort of parse those and make sure that I can figure out which one you were responding to, because I know it's 2 questions at once. But it's important to think about, what's been useful and what we still need to go forward and do this effectively. Ethnic studies is a course that may actually be a graduation requirement soon. And so the work that we're doing here to make effective ethnic studies courses may have a very lasting, enduring impact on the school communities that we have. So we want to make sure that it's done thoughtfully and right. And we're really the ones who are doing this work, are really the ones who are setting this forward for future generations of ethnic studies teachers to follow a model. So what do we envision needing to make that model as portable and as effective as the years go, and considering the different ways that our community might change or how it has remained the same? Now, I see some people talking about primary sources, great. Redefining the course itself as a multidisciplinary, yeah. Yeah, yes. All right, so I do want to respect people's time. So one last thing, and we'll let it go. We'll let everybody head out. So Devin and I are a part of the UC Berkeley History Social Science Project, and we do offer a lot of events and different activities to support folks with their instruction. So Devin, if you want to share a little bit about what you've been working on in terms of Intro to Integrated Action Civics.
Sure, just really briefly, and it dovetails very well with the kind of work that's being done here, is we're really trying to look at how, and I'm working with some teacher research groups around the Bay Area, of how to integrate civic engagement and student empowerment into the course itself, and not just sort of a tack-on project at the end. So the questions of power and the questions of stakeholders and the questions of root causes, all those things that you use in building civic engagement strategies, you use into, we integrate it into the course itself, these different models and tools. And so we're going to be doing a workshop in August 3rd through 5th for just a couple hours in the morning, just giving an introduction to these concepts and some of these models. You're all very invited to come. I put in a link to the workshop flyer and also a link to a brochure that describes a little more about this approach. And you're certainly welcome to email me with questions about that.
Great, thank you, Devin. And one last thing, we are actually providing services, schools and school districts sort of support learning in this really challenging time to be a teacher and challenging time to support our students. So also what Devin will be posting into the group chat there is a First, a form of, also you actually put it in there already, it was the brochure, right? The brochure that talks about like a history instruction in terms of in a time of disruption. That's something that we're offering a lot of different services.
That brochure is on the Integrated Action Civics.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I apologize
Sorry.
for that.
Yeah.
So if you go to the UC Berkeley History Social Science program website, it'll kind of guide you to some of the work that we're doing in terms of that. And sort of helping teachers in this moment where school is different than we imagined it and how to sort of navigate that time right now. Also, if you did want to continue with collaboration or sort of being grouped with other teachers who would be able to continue this work, there's a form for a collaborative group that we're forming. Some people have already responded to it. There's a link to it now. And that collaborative group is going to be there to sort of keep this work going with some of the folks that you may have been grouped with during the chats, during the breakout room chats, and also hopefully other folks that you maybe haven't worked with yet that you'd like to in order to kind of keep this going. So use that there. If you've developed a course or unit level question, there's also a place to share those out with others, and I'll do my best to make sure that the course level and unit level questions that folks have shared are sort of put in an integrated place where we can also review what other people's thinking was along this line. Because sometimes it's useful just to see what other course questions and unit questions are to inform our own thinking. And then last but not least, Devin will share the link for our Facebook group. Thank you for so many of you who have signed up. And if you've been looking at that Facebook group, again, we've already generated some resources to help each other out, move forward with their courses. So again, it's a lot of veteran teachers. It's a lot of new teachers who are engaging in ethnic studies course development for the first time. And again, we can give each other a lot of different pieces of feedback and share ideas and resources as what's been going on. So appreciate all those who have jumped into that. And if you want to continue to do some work there, make comments, or even join if you haven't already, please do so at that link. All right. Well, I think that's our time. We've only went 6 minutes over, so sorry about that. But if you do want to have continued conversations, I'll stay on the line for a few more minutes. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. We appreciated having you. And again, thanks for everyone in your breakout rooms. Thanks for all the participation. And feel free to share any of these resources to whomever you like. Devin, if you want to go ahead and stop the recording, I'll leave it there. And I'll continue with anybody who wants to continue on for a little bit.